On Christmas Eve, billionaire Jackson Bennett walked out on his 7 months pregnant wife. By morning, her face was on every news channel. But this wasn't about infidelity. This was about $1 billion fraud, a murdered whistleblower, 40 million stolen identities, and a father-in-law who would kill to keep his secrets buried. Carolyn Hayes Bennett lost everything: her money, her reputation, her home. But what she discovered would bring down an empire and expose Silicon Valley's darkest crime. One woman, one premature baby, against a billionaire family with unlimited power. If you want to know how she won, stay until the end. Hit like if you're ready for this wild ride, and subscribe for more stories that prove the truth is always more shocking than fiction. The security footage showed everything. December 24th, 11:47 p.m. Jackson Bennett, tech billionaire and so-called philanthropist, walked out of his Central Park penthouse carrying a single duffel bag. He didn't look back. Behind him, his 7 months pregnant wife stood frozen in the doorway. 32 minutes later, Carolyn Hayes Bennett made the call that would change everything. 911, what's your emergency? My husband just left me. Kara's voice cracked. I'm 7 months pregnant and he said he can't do this anymore. He just walked out. Ma'am, is anyone injured? Are you in immediate danger? I don't know. I'm having contractions. I think something's wrong with the baby. By morning, the story was everywhere. Tech Insider's headline read, Bennett Digital CEO vanishes after Christmas Eve meltdown. Bloomberg reported, billionaire missing, wife hospitalized same night. Twitter exploded with hashtags, where is Jax Bennett? Tech scandal, pregnant and abandoned. But this wasn't about cold feet or a midlife crisis. This was about a secret so catastrophic it would destroy two families, dismantle a billion-dollar company, and expose the biggest tech fraud since Theranos. And Kara Hayes Bennett, former nonprofit investigator turned trophy wife, was about to become collateral damage in a war she didn't even know was being fought. 3 years earlier, they'd met at a tech ethics conference in San Francisco. Jax was the keynote speaker, talking about corporate responsibility and giving back. Kara was there investigating a data privacy case for her nonprofit employer. After his speech, she'd approached him with sharp questions about his company's user agreements. Most billionaires would have dismissed her. Jax bought her coffee and talked for 3 hours. He was different, or so it seemed. Brilliant but humble, wealthy but socially conscious. He'd pledged to give away 50% of his fortune. He funded libraries and scholarships. He spoke at universities about ethical capitalism. When he proposed after 8 months, Kara ignored the tiny voice warning her it was too fast. When he suggested she leave her investigative work to run his foundation, she told herself it was an opportunity, not a loss of independence. Getting pregnant had been harder. 2 years of fertility treatments, disappointment after disappointment, until finally, miraculously, it worked. This baby was everything. Their future, their family, proof that love could overcome obstacles. Except the last 3 months had been strange. Jax missed doctor's appointments. He took calls at 2 a.m. he wouldn't explain. She'd found a wire transfer for $250,000 labeled consulting fees with no details. When she asked about it, he'd snapped at her for the first time ever. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Kara, just trust me. But trust was eroding. Fast. Christmas Eve started badly. Kara woke with swollen ankles and a headache that wouldn't quit. She wanted to stay home, but the Bennett family tradition was non-negotiable. The annual charity gala at the Connecticut estate, politicians, celebrities, Fortune 500 executives, all writing checks to Jax's foundation while congratulating themselves for caring about the less fortunate. We need to present a united front tonight, Jax said, barely looking at her as he adjusted his tie. Just smile and get through it. The estate was exactly as insufferable as always. Ice sculptures shaped like angels, a string quartet playing Vivaldi, servers in white gloves offering champagne and canapes to people who thought $500 was pocket change. Kara's silk dress, custom made to accommodate her belly, felt too tight. Everything felt too tight lately. She found a quiet corner near the study, hoping to catch her breath. That's when she heard the voices, angry, sharp, coming from behind the half-closed door. You don't have a choice, son. Richard Bennett Jr.'s voice was cold steel. The SEC is closing in. I won't let you use my company to launder dirty money for foreign governments. Jack sounded desperate. Do you understand what you're asking me to do? It's not your company. Check the fine print on those Series B documents you signed. I control 62% through shell corporations. You're just the face. And if you don't cooperate, you'll go down for fraud while I walk away clean. Kara's hand flew to her belly. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her mother's shock. She pushed the door open. What the hell is going on? Both men turned. Jack's looked like he'd been punched. Richard's expression didn't change at all. Kara, this doesn't concern you, Richard said smoothly. Why don't you go enjoy the party? Doesn't concern me. Your son just said something about laundering money and fraud. I'm 7 months pregnant with his child. Everything concerns me. Jax grabbed her arm. Kara, stop. You don't understand. She yanked away. Then make me understand. That's when Jax exploded. This is exactly why I can't do this. You don't get it. You've never understood the pressure, the impossible situations, the baby, this marriage. It's suffocating me. The room went silent. Even Richard looked surprised. Jackson, he started. No, I'm done, and Jax was already heading for the door. Kara, we're leaving. The drive back to Manhattan was 43 minutes of silence, so heavy it hurt to breathe. At the penthouse, Jax grabbed his keys. I need space. Space. Kara's voice rose. Jax, I'm 7 months pregnant. What does space mean? I don't know if I want this. The words came out flat, final. Any of this. The baby. Us. I can't breathe. You can't breathe. I'm growing your child inside my body and you can't breathe. He was already at the door. I'm sorry. I just need to clear my head. It's Christmas Eve. I know. I'm sorry. I'll call tomorrow. The door closed. The deadbolt clicked. And Caroline Hayes Bennett was alone. Kara didn't sleep. She couldn't. The contractions that started around 2 a.m. came every 15 minutes. Sharp enough to make her gasp, but not consistent enough to be real labor. Just stress. Just her body's way of saying everything is falling apart. She tried calling Jax 23 times. Every call went straight to voicemail. She texted. No response. She called his assistant, his office, even Brandon Cole, his CFO and best friend. Brandon's phone was off too. At 4:17 a.m., the cramping got worse. She called Maggie Crawford, her best friend since college. Kara, what's wrong? He left me. The words came out broken. Jax left me, and I think something's wrong with the baby. Maggie lived in Brooklyn, but she made it to Manhattan in 28 minutes. They spent Christmas morning in the emergency room at Mount Sinai. Dr. Helen Novak, Kara's obstetrician, was called in from her own family celebration. She examined Kara with gentle efficiency, her face unreadable. The baby's okay, she finally said, but your blood pressure is 160 over 100. That's dangerously high. You're showing early signs of preeclampsia. What does that mean? It means you need complete bed rest and zero stress. Adar, Novak paused. Kara, if we can't get this under control, we'll have to deliver early. The baby's lungs aren't fully developed. We need more time. Zero stress, Kara laughed, the sound bitter. My husband just abandoned me on Christmas Eve. How am I supposed to have zero stress? Novak squeezed her hand. I'm going to admit you for observation. 24 hours. We'll monitor you and the baby. While Kara was being moved to a room, Maggie checked her phone. Her face went pale. Kara, you need to see this. The headlines were everywhere. Tech Insider, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal, even TMZ. Bennett Digital CEO missing. After Christmas meltdown. Billionaire husband leaves pregnant wife on Christmas Eve. Caroline Hayes Bennett hospitalized hours after Jackson Bennett disappears. Someone had leaked the story, but not just any version of the story. The version that made Kara look unstable. An anonymous source, later confirmed to be from within the Bennett family circle, suggested Jax had fled due to Caroline's controlling behavior, that the marriage had been arranged for optics, that she trapped him with the pregnancy, that he'd suffered a mental health crisis and needed space to recover. Twitter was brutal. Half the internet called Jax a monster for abandoning his pregnant wife. The other half called Kara a gold digger who'd pushed him too far. Her phone exploded with notifications. Reporters camped outside the hospital. Someone published her personal cell phone number, and she received 462 text messages in 3 hours, ranging from supportive to vicious. "This is Italian Sheen," Maggie muttered, scrolling through the coverage. "How did this blow up so fast?" Kara stared at the ceiling. She knew exactly how. Richard Bennett Sr. had connections everywhere. Media moguls, political strategists, PR firms. If he wanted to control the narrative, he could, and he wanted Kara to look like the problem. But why on the second day in the hospital, Kara got her answer. Brandon Cole called from a blocked number. "Kara, don't say anything, just listen. I don't have much time." His voice was shaking. "Jax didn't leave because of you. He left because of what we found. Bennett Digital isn't what you think it is. Richard's been using the company to sell user data to foreign governments. Dark web stuff, surveillance, blackmail material, everything. Jax found out 6 months ago. He confronted his father and Richard threatened him, told him he'd structured everything so Jax would take the fall." "Brandon, what are you saying?" "I'm saying your husband is running scared and Richard is cleaning house. He's going to blame everything on Jax and make sure you can't defend him. That's why he leaked the story. That's why he's painting you as unstable. If you're not credible, your testimony means nothing." "Where's Jax?" "I don't know, but Kara, be careful. Richard doesn't leave loose ends." The line went dead. Kara sat frozen, Brandon's words echoing. Then she did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She opened her laptop and started investigating. "Doctor, Novak released Kara from the hospital with strict instructions. Bed rest, low stress, healthy diet, monitored blood pressure, return immediately if anything felt wrong." Kara nodded to all of it and then ignored most of it. She couldn't rest. Not now. She moved into Maggie's cramped Brooklyn apartment. The two-bedroom walk-up smelled like lavender and old books, a stark contrast to the Central Park penthouse with its marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows. But it was safe. The reporters hadn't found her here yet. For 3 days, Kara did nothing but dig. She accessed every financial record she could find from her time running Jax's foundation. She reviewed email chains, board meeting notes, donor lists. She looked for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that might prove what Brandon had told her. What she found was worse than she imagined. Bennett Digital Holdings had revenue streams that made no sense. Subsidiaries in the Cayman Islands, consulting fees to shell companies, contracts with organizations she'd never heard of, and buried deep in one quarterly report, a reference to a data partnership with a firm called Sentinel Solutions. She Googled Sentinel Solutions. The website was vague. Enterprise security solutions, data analytics, nothing specific. But the address listed was a P.O. box in Delaware. Red flag. She dug deeper. Sentinel Solutions had contracts with Bennett Digital worth $47 million over 2 years. For what services? The contracts were classified as proprietary technology licensing. Translation: "We can't tell you what we're actually doing." Kara made a list of questions. Who owned Sentinel Solutions? Where did the $47 million actually go? What data was being licensed? And most importantly, did Jax know about this before 6 months ago? Or had Richard hidden it from him too? She needed help. Real help. Not just Google searches and public records. That's when Maggie suggested Todd Marshall. "He's an investigative tech journalist," Maggie explained. "He's been writing about privacy violations and corporate fraud for years. If anyone can help you connect these dots, it's him." Kara hesitated. Bringing in a journalist meant going public. It meant war. But she was already at war. She just hadn't been fighting back. Todd Marshall agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Fort Greene. He was 38, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too many powerful people get away with too much. He listened to Kara's story without interrupting, taking notes in a worn leather notebook. "I've been looking into Bennett Digital for 8 months, he finally said. "Your husband's company has been on my radar for a while, but I couldn't crack it. The financial structure is deliberately opaque. Shell companies within shell companies, offshore accounts. They're good at hiding. What do you think they're hiding? Data brokering, the illegal kind, user information sold to the highest bidder? Could be governments, could be criminal organizations, could be both. If what your husband's CFO told you is true, Bennett Digital is essentially running a black market for personal information. Can you prove it? Not yet, but with your access to internal documents, maybe. If you're willing to go all the way. Kara looked down at her swollen belly. Going all the way meant destroying Jax's company, his reputation, possibly his freedom. It meant making powerful enemies. It meant putting herself and her baby in danger. But Jax had left her. Richard had tried to destroy her credibility. And somewhere out there, millions of people's private information was being sold like a commodity. I'm willing, she said. What Kara didn't know was that 40 blocks north, in a glass-walled office overlooking the Hudson River, Richard Bennett Sr. was having his own meeting. The wife is digging, his head of security reported. She's been accessing old foundation files, and she met with Todd Marshall this afternoon. Richard didn't look up from his scotch. Then it's time to accelerate the timeline. Freeze her accounts, all of them. Sir, no. She wants to play investigator. Let's see how she investigates with no money, no home, and no credibility. And find my son. It's time Jackson came home. Kara found out about the money on a Tuesday morning. She'd gone to the ATM to withdraw cash, something she rarely did anymore. Card declined. She tried again. Still declined. She called the bank. Mrs. Bennett, your account has been closed. Closed by who? By the primary account holder, Jackson Bennett. As of 9 a.m. this morning, all joint accounts have been liquidated. The funds were transferred to a private account. You'll need to speak with him directly. Kara's hands shook. She tried her credit cards. All canceled. She logged into her investment accounts. Frozen. The foundation account she'd managed locked. A message appeared. Access denied. Contact administrator. She called Brandon Cole. No answer. She called the Bennett Digital mainline and asked for the CFO's office. Mr. Cole is unavailable. This is Caroline Bennett. I need to speak with him. It's urgent. A pause. Then, ma'am, Mr. Cole is no longer with the company. He resigned effective immediately. Resigned. Brandon had been Jax's best friend for 15 years. He wouldn't just resign. Kara called Maggie, trying not to panic. I need a lawyer. Now. 2 hours later, she sat across from Diane Porter in a modest office in Brooklyn. Diane was 44, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for taking on powerful men who abused their wives financially. How much money do you have access to right now? Diane asked. $847 in my personal checking account. Properties. The penthouse is leased through Bennett Digital. I checked this morning. The lease was terminated. I have 30 days to vacate. Cars, company cars, also gone. Income. I left my job 3 years ago to run Jax's foundation, which he apparently now controls exclusively. Diane leaned back, her expression grim. Caroline, I'm going to be blunt. Your husband has systematically stripped you of every financial resource. This is economic abuse. It's calculated and it's cruel. But the good news is that it's also illegal. What can we do? We file for emergency relief, freeze his assets, force him to provide support during the separation, and we challenge the prenuptial agreement. The prenup, Kara had signed it before the wedding. She'd barely read it. She trusted Jax. God, she'd been so naive. Who represented you when you signed it? A lawyer Jax recommended. Amber something. Diane's eyebrows shot up. Amber Sutton. Yes. Do you know her? She's a corporate attorney, contract law. She has no business handling a prenuptial agreement, especially not for someone signing away rights against her own client's company. Diane smiled, sharp and predatory. If she represented both you and Bennett Digital's interests, that's a conflict of interest. The prenup is void. For the first time in days, Kara felt hope. They moved fast. Diane filed an emergency motion to freeze all Bennett family assets pending a custody and support hearing. She filed a separate motion challenging the prenuptial agreement based on conflict of interest and lack of proper representation. And then she did something brilliant. She called a press conference. The Brooklyn courthouse steps were packed. Reporters, cameras, curious onlookers. Kara stood beside Diane, 7 months pregnant and visibly exhausted, and read a prepared statement. My name is Caroline Hayes Bennett. 8 days ago, My husband Jackson Bennett abandoned me on Christmas Eve. Since then, his family has systematically destroyed my reputation, frozen my access to money, and attempted to leave me destitute while I carry his child. I am here today to say enough. I will not be silenced. I will not be bullied. And I will fight for my child and for the truth. The crowd erupted with questions, but Diane ushered her away. The video went viral within hours. Public opinion shifted. Suddenly, Kara wasn't the unstable wife. She was the victim. Donations poured into a GoFundMe. Someone set up for her legal fees. It hit $50,000 in 6 hours. By the next morning, it was over 200,000. Messages of support flooded in. Women who'd experienced financial abuse, men disgusted by Jackson's behavior, even celebrities weighing in. Kara Hayes Bennett became a symbol, pregnant and powerful, abandoned but not broken. For 48 hours, Kara thought she was winning. Then TMZ published the video. The footage was crystal clear, high definition, perfect lighting, obviously shot by someone who knew what they were doing. Jackson Bennett and Amber Sutton stepping off a private plane in Turks and Caicos, Jax's hand on her lower back. Amber laughing at something he said, and then the kiss. Long, deep, utterly unmistakable. But the worst part wasn't the kiss, it was the ring. Amber Sutton was wearing Patricia Bennett's engagement ring, Jax's late mother's ring, a 3-carat diamond surrounded by sapphires. Kara had seen it once, in a photo album. Patricia had died when Jax was 16. He'd told Kara the ring was in a safety deposit box, too precious to wear, too precious for his wife, but apparently not too precious for his mistress. The video included audio. Someone had placed a microphone nearby. You could hear their conversation. Jax, finally free of her. God, I can breathe again. Amber, are you sure about this? Once the divorce is final, Jax, I'm sure, the baby was a mistake. I never wanted kids. I want this. You. Kara watched the video 7 times before she could cry. Then she couldn't stop. Maggie found her on the bathroom floor, phone clutched in her hand, sobbing so hard she was hyperventilating. The baby, Kara gasped. He called our baby a mistake. Maggie called Dr. Novak. By the time they got Kara to the hospital, her blood pressure was 190 over 120. Critical. Dr. Novak admitted her immediately. If this doesn't stabilize, we're delivering tonight, she said quietly. The baby won't survive. You won't survive. Kara, you have to calm down. But how do you calm down when your entire world has just been revealed as a lie? The media frenzy was worse than before. Now it wasn't just abandonment and ignorance. It was betrayal, infidelity, and the lawyer angle made it even more salacious. The woman who'd handled Kara's prenup was now sleeping with her husband. Legal experts on cable news debated whether the conflict of interest nullified the prenup. The answer was yes, but the damage was done. The internet, which had briefly supported Kara, turned vicious. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a fool. Comments ranged from sympathetic to brutal. She should have seen this coming. Rich men always cheat. She was naive. Honestly, good for him. She seems exhausting. That baby was definitely a trap. He's smart to run. The GoFundMe was suspended. Something about terms of service violations. The $200,000 in donations returned to donors. Kara's legal fund vanished overnight. Diane was furious. This is a coordinated attack. Someone is working very hard to destroy your credibility. Richard, Kara said flatly. It's always been Richard. And then, as if on cue, Richard Bennett Sr. held his own press conference. He stood outside the Bennett family estate in Connecticut, wearing a Navy suit and an expression of paternal concern. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. He waited for silence. I want to address the situation with my son Jackson and his wife Carolyn. This is a difficult time for our family. Jackson is currently receiving treatment at a private psychiatric facility in Switzerland. He has been struggling with severe anxiety and depression for months. The pressure of running a major corporation, combined with the imminent birth of his first child, triggered a mental health crisis. He paused, letting that sink in. Caroline is a good woman, but she is understandably emotional and upset. Unfortunately, in her pain, she has made allegations that are simply not true. She has accused my son of abandonment and financial abuse. The reality is that Jackson is ill. He needs help. And I hope that Caroline, who claims to love him, will allow him the space and time to heal, rather than attacking him publicly during his most vulnerable moment. The message was clear. Jax was the victim now, mentally ill, overwhelmed, unfairly vilified. And Kara, she was the cruel wife who was attacking a sick man. Public opinion flipped again. The comments under news articles shifted. She's making it worse by going public. If he's really in a psychiatric facility, she needs to back off. This is why men don't talk about mental health. They get crucified. Kara watched it all from her hospital bed. Alone, Maggie had gone home to shower. Dr. Novak was dealing with another patient, and Kara sat in the dark, monitors beeping, feeling her baby kick, and wondering how she'd lost control of her own story so completely. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Mrs. Bennett, a man's voice, unfamiliar. This is Todd Marshall. I need you to listen very carefully. I know what Richard Bennett is doing. I know why your husband ran, and I have proof. But we need to move fast. Can you meet me tomorrow? Kara looked down at her belly, at the monitors tracking her blood pressure, at the IV in her arm. I'm in the hospital. I'll come to you, Dohyung. Don't trust anyone. And whatever you do, don't answer questions from the press until we talk. He hung up. Kara stared at her phone. Spotlight. Then she did something she hadn't done since childhood. She prayed. Todd Marshall arrived at Mount Sinai at 8 p.m., carrying a messenger bag and wearing an expression Kara had seen before. On her own face, in the mirror, 3 years ago, when she'd been investigating corporate fraud for her nonprofit and getting close to something big. It was the look of someone who'd found a truth so ugly. It changed everything. Dr. Novak led him into Kara's room reluctantly. 20 minutes. Her blood pressure can't take stress. Todd waited until the doctor left. Then he pulled out a laptop. What I'm about to show you, you can't unsee. Are you ready? Kara nodded. 2 days before Brandon Cole allegedly resigned, he sent me an encrypted email. He said if anything happened to him, I should give you this. Todd opened a video file. Brandon's face filled the screen. He looked terrible. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, sitting in what looked like a cheap hotel room. Kara, if you're watching this, something went wrong. I need you to know the truth about Bennett Digital Holdings, about your husband, about everything. He took a shaky breath. 18 months ago, I discovered irregularities in our financial reports. Revenue that didn't match our product sales, contracts with companies that didn't seem to exist. I asked Jackson about it. He told me not to worry, that his father handled certain special projects. I should have pushed harder. I didn't. Brandon leaned closer to the camera. 6 months ago, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I did a deep audit. Kara, Bennett Digital is a front. The real business is data brokering. We collect user information through our apps, our software, everything, and then we sell it. Not to advertisers, to anyone who will pay, foreign governments, criminal organizations, intelligence agencies. We've sold personal data on over 40 million Americans. Kara's hand flew to her mouth. It gets worse. The operation is run through shell companies controlled by Richard Bennett Sr. He structured everything so that if the authorities ever caught on, Jackson would take the fall. Jackson's name is on all the documents. Jackson signed all the contracts, but he didn't know what he was signing. Richard used his own son as a fall guy. Brandon rubbed his face. When I told Jackson what I found, he was destroyed. He confronted his father. Richard gave him 3 choices. 1, cooperate and eventually go to prison. 2, blow the whistle and lose everything, including his freedom, because Richard has lawyers who can prove Jackson signed off on everything. 3, disappear, fake a breakdown, let Richard dismantle the operation quietly and then come back when the heat dies down. The video paused. Brandon looked directly into the camera. Jackson chose option 3. He left you to protect you. Kara, if you weren't connected to him, you couldn't be charged as an accomplice. But Richard is smarter than that. He's keeping you close by destroying your credibility and your resources. That way, if you try to expose him, no one will believe you. And if Jackson tries to testify, Richard can say his mentally ill son is being manipulated by his vengeful wife. Brandon's voice dropped. I'm going to the FBI tomorrow. I have copies of everything, financial records, communications, proof that Richard controlled the operation. But if something happens to me, you need to know the truth, and you need to tell it." The video ended. Todd closed the laptop. Brandon never made it to the FBI. 2 days after he sent me this, he was dead. "The suicide," Kara whispered. "Allegedly. But suicides don't usually leave their laptop with encrypted files for journalists. Suicides don't usually happen when someone's about to blow the whistle on a billion-dollar fraud." Kara felt cold. "You think he was murdered?" "I think Brandon Cole knew too much. And Richard Bennett doesn't leave loose ends." Todd pulled out a folder. "I've been working with sources inside Bennett Digital, former employees, people who left when things started feeling wrong. This is what we've compiled." He spread documents across Kara's bed: financial statements, email chains, contracts with names blacked out, wire transfers to offshore accounts. "If we go public with this, if we give it to the FBI and the SEC and the press, we can destroy Bennett Digital Holdings. We can expose Richard. We can maybe even save your husband from prison, because we can prove he was manipulated." But Kara could hear the but in his voice. "But Richard Bennett is connected. Politicians, judges, media executives. He'll fight back. He'll bury this if he can. He'll come after both of us. And Kara, well, you're 7 months pregnant with dangerously high blood pressure. Is this worth your life?" Kara looked at the documents, at Brandon's frozen face on the laptop screen, at the monitors tracking her baby's heartbeat. She thought about every woman whose data had been sold, every person whose privacy had been violated, every family Richard Bennett had destroyed in his quest for money and power. She thought about her daughter growing up in a world where powerful men never faced consequences. "Yes," she said, "it's worth it." They worked through the night. Todd had contacts at the FBI, at the SEC, at the Department of Justice. Kara provided internal documents from her time running the foundation: email access, board meeting minutes, everything she could find that connected the dots. By dawn, they had a plan: release the story simultaneously to multiple outlets, provide evidence to federal investigators, hold a press conference with Brandon's video. But first, they needed one more piece of the puzzle. They needed Jax. "He's not in Switzerland," Todd said. "I checked. No psychiatric facilities have anyone registered under his name. So where is he?" Kara pulled up her laptop. She logged into the credit card account she'd set up years ago for emergencies, an account Jax didn't know about, an account she'd funded with her own money, back when she still had her own money. She checked the activity. Nothing for months. Then, 3 days ago, a charge, a small charge, $17.32 at a diner in Portland, Maine. "I know where he is," Kara said. Diane Porter filed an emergency motion to subpoena Jackson Bennett's whereabouts, citing Brandon Cole's video as evidence that Jax was not actually in psychiatric care, but was instead in hiding. The motion was scheduled for a hearing in 3 days. Kara spent those 3 days at DeMaggie's apartment, preparing. Todd Marshall finalized the article. The FBI opened a formal investigation based on Brandon's evidence. Everything was falling into place. Then catastrophe struck. Not once, 3 times, each worse than the last. Catastrophe. One arrived on a Tuesday morning. Kara was eating breakfast, trying to keep food down despite constant nausea, when Dr. Novak called. "Kara, I need you to come to the hospital now." "What's wrong?" "Your latest blood work came back. Your protein levels are extremely elevated. Your blood pressure is spiking despite medication. You're developing severe preeclampsia. If we don't intervene, you could have a seizure or a stroke. The baby could die." Kara's fork clattered to the plate. "What does intervene mean?" "It means we need to deliver soon, but Kara, you're at 32 weeks. The baby's lungs aren't fully developed. She'll need intensive care. Weeks, maybe months in the NICU. And even then, there are risks, respiratory problems, developmental delays. We can't know. How soon? I want you admitted today. We'll try to buy another week with steroids and bed rest. But if your condition worsens, we deliver immediately." Kara was admitted by noon. Maggie stayed with her, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair, bringing her things from the apartment. Todd visited with updates on the investigation. Diane prepared for the hearing, but Kara could barely focus. Every time she looked at the monitors tracking her baby's heartbeat, she thought about tiny lungs struggling to breathe, about tubes and machines and a future she couldn't control. Catastrophe 2 happened 36 hours later. Kara was half asleep when her phone buzzed. A news alert. She almost ignored it. Then she saw the headline: Bennett Digital CFO found dead in apparent suicide. No, no, no. She opened the article with shaking hands. Brandon Cole, 42, Chief Financial Officer of Bennett Digital Holdings, was found dead in his Manhattan apartment early this morning. Police are investigating the death as an apparent suicide. Cole had recently resigned from his position at the company. Friends say he had been struggling with depression. No foul play is suspected. The article included a photo, Brandon smiling at some corporate event. Before he knew the truth, before he became a liability, Kara called Todd immediately. I know, he said before she could speak. I'm at the scene now. Kara, this wasn't suicide. How do you know? Brandon sent me the encrypted video from this apartment. I was here 2 weeks ago. He had 3 deadbolts on his door, a security camera in the hallway, and a gun in his bedside table because he was terrified. Today, door was unlocked. Camera was disabled. Gun was gone. And the note they're saying he left, it's typed, not handwritten. Any decent investigator would call bullshit, but the NYPD ruled it suicide in under 4 hours. Richard, Kara whispered. Has to be. Kara, listen to me. We're running out of time. If Richard is willing to kill Brandon, he's desperate. That means we're close, but it also means we're in danger. The hearing is tomorrow. I know. That's why I'm publishing tonight. FBI, SEC, DOJ, they all have the evidence now. The story goes live in 3 hours. Bennett Digital will be front-page news by morning. Richard can't stop it. Kara should have felt relieved. Victory was close, but all she felt was dread. Catastrophe 3 came at 4:17 p.m. Kara was dozing, Maggie beside her, when someone knocked on the hospital room door. A man in an expensive suit entered, carrying a briefcase. Mrs. Bennett, I'm Gerald Hastings. I represent Richard Bennett Sr. Maggie stood immediately. She's not speaking to anyone without her lawyer present. I'm simply here to serve papers. He handed Kara an envelope. Inside was a court filing. Emergency custody petition. Richard Bennett Sr. was suing for custody of the unborn child. Kara read it twice, unable to process the words. This can't be legal, Maggie said, snatching the document. You can't file for custody of a baby that hasn't been born yet. Under New York law, a grandparent may petition for custody if the child's welfare is at immediate risk. Mr. Bennett Sr. contends that Mrs. Bennett is medically unstable, financially destitute, and emotionally unfit to care for an infant. He's requesting that, upon birth, the child be placed in his temporary custody pending a full evaluation. Kara found her voice. Get out! Mrs. Bennett, get the hell out of my room before I call security. He left. Maggie immediately called Diane. Diane arrived within an hour, her face grim. They filed this in Connecticut, where the Bennett family has connections. The judge who signed the emergency order is a friend of Richard's. It's corrupt as hell, but it's legal enough to cause problems. Can they really take my baby? Not if I can help it. But Kara, this is war. Richard is playing every card he has. The hearing tomorrow is going to be brutal. That night, Kara couldn't sleep. Kara. She lay in the hospital bed, listening to machines beep, feeling her daughter kick, and thinking about everything that had led here. She'd trusted Jax. She'd given up her career for him. She'd believed in his goodness, his vision, his love. And it had all been a carefully constructed lie. But worse than Jax's betrayal was Richard's cruelty. He wasn't just trying to protect himself. He was trying to destroy her, systematically, financially, socially, legally, and now he wanted her child. At 11 p.m., Todd's article went live. Silicon Valley's darkest secret, how Bennett Digital sold your data to the highest bidder. Within 20 minutes, it was trending. Within an hour, other outlets were picking it up. By midnight, the FBI issued a statement confirming an ongoing investigation. The SEC announced they were reviewing Bennett Digital's financial practices. Senator after senator called for hearings. Bennett Digital's stock crashed. Trading was halted. Investors demanded answers. Employees leaked horror stories to the press. The company that Jax had built, that Richard had corrupted, was collapsing in real time. And at 3:27 a.m., Kara went into labor. The pain started as a dull ache, the kind Kara had gotten used to over the past week. Then it sharpened, intensified, became something else entirely. She pressed the call button. A nurse arrived within seconds, took one look at the monitor reporters, and her eyes widened. Get Dr. Novak, now. Everything after that was chaos. Dr. Novak, still in street clothes, examining her quickly. Orders shouted to nurses, someone wheeling in equipment. Maggie, who'd gone home to shower, being called back immediately. Your blood pressure is 195 over 130, Dr. Novak said, her voice calm but urgent. We need to deliver, now. If we wait, you could have a stroke or a seizure. The baby's in distress. She's too early, Kara gasped between contractions. I know, but she'll have a better chance outside than inside right now. Kara, we need to do a C-section. We need to do it in the next 10 minutes. Do you understand? Kara nodded, terrified. They wheeled her to the operating room. Maggie was there, wearing scrubs, holding Kara's hand. The anesthesiologist explained the epidural. Dr. Novak positioned herself behind the blue curtain. You're going to feel pressure, she said. But no pain. Talk to me. Kara, tell me about your baby's name. Have you decided? Kara tried to focus through the fear. Jane. After my grandmother. That's a beautiful name. Jane Bennett. Not Bennett. Kara's voice was firm despite everything. Jane Hayes. My last name? Not his. Jane Hayes. I like it. Dr. Novak was working. Kara could feel the strange pressure and pulling. She's going to be strong. Kara, just like her mother. Then, at 4:09 a.m. on a Thursday morning in early January, Jane Hayes was born. She didn't cry. That was the first terrifying thing. The silence. Is she okay? Kara tried to lift her head, but couldn't see past the curtain. She's breathing, Dr. Novak said, but her tone was careful. The NICU team is here. They're going to take her now, get her stabilized. You'll see her soon. Kara caught a glimpse as they rushed past. A tiny, impossibly tiny baby, wrapped in blankets, surrounded by medical personnel. How much does she weigh? Maggie asked. 4 pounds, 2 ounces. A nurse called back. Then Jane was gone, whisked away to the neonatal intensive care unit while Kara lay on the operating table, being stitched back together, feeling emptier than she'd ever felt in her life. The next hours were a blur. Recovery room, more monitoring, blood pressure still dangerously high, medication pumped through her IV, Maggie keeping vigil, updating Diane, fielding calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten her number. At 8:30 a.m., they finally wheeled Kara to the NICU. Jane was in an incubator, tiny and pink, with tubes and wires attached to her fragile body. A ventilator helped her breathe. Monitors tracked her heart rate, oxygen levels, temperature. She's stable but bound, the NICU doctor explained. But her lungs need time to develop. We're giving her surfactant to help with breathing. She'll likely be here for 6 to 8 weeks, maybe longer. Can I touch her through the incubator ports? Keep it brief. She needs rest. Kara put her hand through the opening, gently touched her daughter's tiny hand. Jane's fingers, impossibly small, curled around hers, and Kara cried. For the first time since Jax left, she let herself completely break down because this beautiful, fragile, perfect little human was here. She was alive, and she was worth every single second of pain, betrayal, and fear that had led to this moment. She's beautiful, Maggie whispered, standing beside her. She is. They stayed like that for 20 minutes. Kara just watching her daughter breathe, silently promising to protect her from Richard, from Jax, from anyone who would try to hurt her. Then Diane arrived. Her expression told Kara everything before she spoke. I have news. None of it is good. They moved to a private waiting room. Diane closed the door. Todd's article caused exactly the panic we hoped for. Bennett Digital is under investigation by half a dozen federal agencies. Richard is scrambling. His lawyers are trying to get the story retracted, claiming libel and defamation. It won't work. The evidence is too solid. That's good. Right. It would be, except this morning, federal agents raided Todd's apartment and seized all his electronics. They also seized the evidence Brandon sent him. Kara's stomach dropped. Why? National security concerns. Apparently, some of the data Bennett Digital sold involved classified information. The government is claiming the evidence is too sensitive to be public. They've gotten an emergency injunction sealing everything related to the case. They can't do that. They already did. Todd's article has been taken down from the website. His editor received a call from the Department of Justice threatening prosecution if they republish. The FBI confirmed they have an investigation, but they're not commenting further. Everything we worked for, all the evidence, it's locked away. Richard did this, Kara said flatly. He has connections. He called in favors. Probably was, but it's worse than that. Diane pulled out another document. Remember the custody filing? The judge granted temporary custody to Richard Bennett Sr., effective immediately. Upon release from the NICU, Jane goes to him. Kara felt the world tilt. No, they can't. She's my daughter. The court found that you're medically unstable, financially unable to provide care, and that Richard can offer a safer, more stable environment. It's temporary. We can fight it. But it will take months, maybe a year. A year she'll be walking by then. Talking. She won't even know me. I know. I'm so sorry. Kara. Kara sat very still. Jane was in an incubator, 3 floors down, fighting for every breath. Brandon was dead. Jax was hiding. The evidence was buried. Richard was winning. And she was about to lose her daughter. Kara stayed at the hospital for 3 days after Jane's birth. Technically, she should have been discharged after 24 hours. But Dr. Novak admitted her for continued blood pressure monitoring. Really, it was so she could be near Jane. Kara spent every moment she was allowed in the NICU, watching her daughter breathe, singing soft lullabies, telling her stories about her grandmother, about the life they'd have together, promising her that somehow, some way, they'd be okay. On the 3rd day, a visitor arrived. Not Diane, not Maggie, not Todd, Jax. He appeared in the NICU doorway looking like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Unshaven, thinner, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of his usual tailored suits. He saw Kara and stopped. Hi, he said quietly. Kara stood, fury and heartbreak colliding in her chest. You have a lot of nerve showing up here. I know I don't deserve to see her. But Kara, please, let me explain. Explain that you abandoned me on Christmas Eve, that you called our daughter a mistake, that you've been hiding while your father tried to destroy me. That video was edited. I never said those things. Not like that. Jax looked at Jane through the incubator. She's so small. She was born early because the stress of you leaving sent my blood pressure through the roof. She's 4 pounds. Jax, 4 pounds. Because of you. He flinched. I'm sorry. God. Kara, I'm so sorry. But you have to understand. My father threatened me. He was going to pin everything on me. The data brokering, the illegal sales, all of it. I had to leave. I had to make it look like I was unstable, unreliable, so that when the truth came out, no one would believe I was involved. You left me alone, pregnant, with no money, while your father launched a campaign to destroy me. I didn't know he'd do that. I thought if you weren't connected to me, you'd be safe. I was trying to protect you. Kara laughed bitterly. Protect me? Your father is trying to take our daughter. Did you know that he's been granted temporary custody? When Jane is released from the NICU, she goes to him. Not to me, to him. Jax's face went white. What? He filed an emergency petition claiming I'm unfit, and he won. So congratulations. Jax, you protected me right into losing my child. I'll fix this. Jax pulled out his phone. I'll call his lawyer. I'll testify that you're fit. You'll what? Your father has you exactly where he wants you. If you testify against him, He'll blame everything on you. You'll go to prison. If you stay silent, he wins. There's no move you can make that doesn't destroy you or me or both of us." They stood in silence, separated by 3 feet in a chasm of betrayal. Finally, Jack spoke. "I've been working with the FBI for 3 months. I'm wearing a wire. I've recorded conversations with my father admitting to everything. The data sales, the money laundering, Brandon's murder." Kara's head snapped up. "Brandon was murdered. Yes, my father had him killed. Made it look like suicide. The NYPD was paid off, but I have proof. I recorded my father bragging about it to his head of security. Kara, I'm testifying before a grand jury next week. My father is going down. And you, what happens to you? I made a deal, immunity in exchange for testimony. I forfeit everything, the company, the fortune, all of it. But I don't go to prison." "How noble," Kara said coldly. "You sacrifice your money to avoid consequences. What else was I supposed to do? You were supposed to stay. You were supposed to fight beside me instead of running away. You were supposed to be my husband." Jax looked at Jane again. "Can I hold her?" "No." "Kara, you don't get to hold her. You don't get to play father after abandoning us. You get to leave, like you're so good at doing." "I love you," Jack said desperately. "I know I've destroyed everything, but I still love you, and I love her. Please, give me a chance to fix this." Before Kara could respond, the door opened. Richard Bennett Sr. walked in, flanked by 2 lawyers. "Jackson," Richard said smoothly, "I thought I might find you here. And Caroline, how's our little granddaughter? Get out." Kara said, "I'm afraid I can't do that. I have custody rights now. I'm here to check on my granddaughter's medical progress." "You're here to gloat." Richard smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I'm here to offer you a deal." He gestured to one of the lawyers, who pulled out a document. "This is a settlement agreement. You sign an NDA. You agree never to speak publicly about the Bennett family, Bennett Digital, or any events related to my son's departure. In exchange, I establish a trust fund for your daughter, $50 million. She'll never want for anything. College, medical care, a home. It's all covered. You're trying to buy my silence. I'm trying to ensure my granddaughter has a future. Kara, let's be realistic. You're broke. You're blacklisted in every professional circle that matters. You have no job, no home, no prospects. That baby needs specialized medical care. NICU bills alone will bankrupt you. I'm offering you security. At what cost? Disappear. Change your name if you'd like. Raise Jane quietly. Never speak of the Bennett family again. It's a small price for $50 million. Kara looked at Jax. He was staring at his father with undisguised hatred, but he said nothing. She looked at Jane, tiny and helpless in her incubator. She thought about what accepting would mean. Money, stability, a future for her daughter. And all she had to do was let Richard Bennett win. Let him get away with fraud, with Brandon's murder, with destroying lives. She thought about the 40 million people whose data had been sold, the families whose privacy had been violated, the corrupt system that protected men like Richard while punishing women like her. She looked at Richard. "Get out." "Excuse me. Get out, both of you." She pointed at Jax. "I don't need your money about. I don't need your name. I don't need either of you." Richard's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake." "No, you made mistakes, and now you're going to pay for them." Kara's voice was steel. "Not today, maybe not this month, but I will spend the rest of my life making sure you do. I don't need $50 million to tell the truth. I just need to survive long enough to tell it. The evidence is sealed. For now, but sealed things have a way of getting unsealed, especially when federal investigations lead to grand jury testimony." She looked at Jax. "Right." Jax finally spoke. "I'm testifying against him. Dad, next week, everything. The data brokering, the money laundering, Brandon's murder. All of it." Richard's face went red. "You ungrateful. Get out of my daughter's hospital room before I call security." Kara said. For a long moment, Richard just stared at her. Then he turned and walked out, his lawyers scrambling after him. Jack stayed. "Kara, No, you need to leave too. Let me help, please. You want to help testify? Tell the truth. Send your father to prison. Then stay away from us. Jane deserves better than a father who runs when things get hard. Tears streamed down Jax's face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know. Now go. He left, and Kara sank into the chair beside Jane's incubator, exhausted, alone, but somehow, finally, free. The courtroom was packed. Standing room only. Reporters lined the walls, cameras positioned for the perfect shot of Richard Bennett Sr. as he heard his sentence. Kara sat in the second row, Jane on her lap, 1 year old now, 22 pounds, healthy, happy, with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes. Judge Margaret Collins read the verdict dispassionately. Richard Bennett Sr., you have been found guilty of wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, and over 40 counts of illegal data trafficking. The evidence against you was overwhelming. Your actions harmed millions of Americans, violated their privacy, and betrayed the public trust. This court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison, to be followed by 5 years supervised release. You are to forfeit all assets obtained through criminal activity. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Richard, thinner and older than he'd been a year ago, showed no emotion. His lawyers immediately filed notice of appeal. But everyone knew it wouldn't matter. The evidence was ironclad. Jax's testimony had been devastating. The FBI had recovered financial records, communications, even a recording of Richard discussing Brandon's death. Richard Bennett was going to prison. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Kara had agreed to make a statement. She stood at the microphone, holding Jane, with Diane Porter beside her. A year ago, I was abandoned by my husband on Christmas Eve. I was 7 months pregnant, terrified, and alone. The man I loved had left me. His father tried to destroy me. They froze my bank accounts, tried to take my daughter, and nearly succeeded in silencing me forever. She paused, looking down at Jane, who was playing with her necklace. But I'm still here. We're still here. And today, justice was served. A reporter called out, "What's your relationship with Jackson Bennett now?" "We're co-parenting. Jack sees Jane twice a month under supervised visitation. He's in therapy. He's working a normal job as a software consultant. He's trying to rebuild his life. Whether we'll ever be more than Jane's parents, I don't know. Some betrayals run too deep to fully forgive." "What about the $50 million trust fund Richard offered you?" "I turned it down. Instead, I sued the Bennett family estate for compensatory damages. I won $8.7 million. I've used that money to start a foundation for pregnant women facing financial abuse. We provide legal support, temporary housing, and advocacy, because no woman should have to face what I faced alone. Do you have a message for other women in similar situations?" Kara looked directly into the camera. "Yes, if someone is trying to control you through money, through fear, through manipulation, you are not powerless. Document everything, find allies, tell your story, and never, ever let them make you believe you deserve it. You don't. Your children don't. Fight back, even when it's terrifying, even when you don't think you'll win, because sometimes, against all odds, you do." She stepped away from the microphone. Diane guided her through the crowd to a waiting car. Inside, Maggie was waiting. "How do you feel?" "Tired," Kara admitted. "But good, really good." They drove to Brooklyn, to the modest apartment Kara now rented. Not a penthouse, not a mansion, just a 2-bedroom walk-up with decent light and a park nearby. It was enough. That evening, after Jane was asleep, Kara sat at her laptop. She'd started writing a memoir, the whole story, from beginning to end. Her editor said it would be published next fall. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jax. "Saw the news. You were amazing. Thank you for letting me see Jane next weekend. I won't let you down." Kara stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, "Don't thank me. Thank Jane. She deserves to know her father, even if he's flawed. Just don't break her heart like you broke mine." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Finally, I won't. I promise." Kara set her phone down and looked around her small apartment, at Jane's toys scattered on the floor, at the framed photos on the wall, Kara and Maggie, Kara and Jane. Jane's first birthday party. At the life she'd built from nothing after losing everything. People asked if she forgave Jax. The honest answer was complicated. She understood why he'd run. Fear made people do terrible things. But understanding wasn't the same as forgiveness. Maybe someday she'd get there. Maybe not. What mattered was that she'd survived. She'd faced down a billionaire and his ruthless father. She'd protected her daughter. She'd told the truth even when the system tried to silence her. And she'd won. Not a fairy tale victory, not a perfect ending, but a real one. The kind where you wake up every day a little stronger than before, where you look at your child and know you did everything possible to give her a better world, where you carry scars but refuse to let them define you. 3 months after Richard's sentencing, Todd Marshall's full investigation was finally published. The evidence had been unsealed after the conviction. The story won a Pulitzer Prize. Congressional hearings were held. 47 executives at various tech companies were indicted. New privacy laws were passed. Brandon Cole's family received a $12 million wrongful death settlement. A scholarship fund was established in his name. Amber Sutton was disbarred and charged with fraud. She took a plea deal, received 2 years probation and community service. Bennett Digital Holdings was dismantled, its assets seized and distributed to victims of the data breach. And Caroline Hayes, formerly Bennett, rebuilt her life one day at a time. She gave talks at universities about corporate fraud and financial abuse. She testified before Congress about privacy rights. She became an advocate, a voice for women who'd been silenced. One evening, a year and a half after that Christmas Eve, Kara sat in a conference room at a women's shelter, talking to a room full of survivors. People asked him if it was worth it, she said. Losing everything, nearly dying, fighting for 2 years just to get justice. And I always say yes, because my daughter is watching. And I want her to grow up knowing that when someone tries to destroy you, you don't just survive, you fight back, you tell the truth, and you never did, ever let them win. The room erupted in applause. After the talk, a young woman approached her. She was pregnant, maybe 6 months, with bruises barely hidden by her sleeves. My husband controls all our money, she whispered. He says if I leave, I'll have nothing, that I'll never survive without him. Is that true? Kara took her hand. No, it's not true. It's what he wants you to believe. But you're stronger than you know, and you don't have to do this alone. Let me help you. Later that night, back in her apartment, Kara checked on Jane, fast asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit, peaceful and safe. Kara stood in the doorway, watching her daughter breathe, remembering that terrifying night in the NICU when every breath felt like a miracle, remembering the fear, the pain, the impossible choices, and feeling grateful, not for the betrayal or the suffering, but for what it had taught her, that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined, that love wasn't always gentle or easy, that justice was possible, even when the system was stacked against you, that sometimes the only way forward was to walk through fire and emerge, scarred but unbroken. On the other side, her phone buzzed one last time, a message from Diane. Richard's appeal was denied. He's going to serve the full 15 years. We won, Kara. We actually won. Kara smiled. Then she turned off her phone, climbed into bed, and slept soundly for the first time in 2 years. Because tomorrow, she had work to do. Women to help, stories to tell, a daughter to raise, and a life to live. Not the life she'd planned, but the life she'd fought for, the life she'd earned. This story is inspired by real events in the tech industry. While names and details have been changed, the corruption, the abuse, and the courage required to fight back. That's all real. If you or someone you know is experiencing financial abuse or domestic violence, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-79-972-33 or visit thehotline.org. Carolyn Hayes' foundation, Mothers Against Financial Abuse, continues to provide legal support and advocacy for pregnant women facing economic control. To learn more or donate, visit their website. Justice isn't always swift. It isn't always fair, but it is possible. Keep fighting.